So the big question is, why is control so very unhelpful a thing when it comes to the psychological realm? This is the crucial question, and it's also a question that it's really hard to understand or explain using our normal reference. In some ways it's probably not so hard to explain, but with our normal way of thinking about things, there's almost an insurmountable barrier. So what we can say about controlling in the psychological realm is that when we control, we necessarily take a whole lot of stuff for granted. Unless we take a whole lot of stuff for granted, we can't control. And the reason for this is, unless what we take for granted as being true is taken for granted as being true, then the outcome of our controlling will become meaningless. So in other words, we have this picture of the world that is based on, to put it very simply or crudely, right and wrong. Right and wrong's lovely because it's black and white. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And how can you argue with that? There's no arguing with that. So the thing that we don't see, even though we should do, because we're conscious beings, we should see simple stuff like this, is that right and wrong only gets to be right and wrong because we assume a point of view, a single point of view, and we ignore all other possible points of view. And that makes our way of seeing things black and white. That makes right and wrong come into the world, and then controlling is easy because controlling is nothing else but right and wrong. Implicit in right and wrong is that right is good and wrong is bad, and also that we should try to strive for right and try to strive to avoid what's wrong. So there's controlling. And the whole damn thing becomes completely meaningless if there is no absolute right and absolute wrong, but if our right and our wrong is only a function of our way of looking at things, which we chose to look at things in that way, and we make right and wrong. So really it's a game, and technically speaking, this is a game. Right and wrong is a game. Our black and white rational viewpoint of the world is a game. It's a game because we can drop it anytime we want and look at things a different way. There's no rule saying we have to play the game, in other words. And I think that's a kind of a quote from James Carse. There's no rule saying there has to be a rule, is another way of putting that. And that might also be a quote from James Carse. That might be the real quote. The first one may not be the quote. So there's no rule saying there has to be a rule. And that kind of is confusing for us because what we're talking about there is a thing called freedom. And freedom is confusing. Don't ever be fooled into thinking freedom's a nice thing and we like it and it's good, because freedom's a terrifying thing. We just don't know what freedom means. We think freedom means the freedom to play our game uninterruptedly. So I could say that freedom for me means the freedom to obtain my goals and get what I think is the right outcome. And with nothing stopping me doing that. So then I'll say, yippee, I'm free because I can obtain the outcomes I see as being right for me or for whatever. But that isn't freedom, because that only comes about because of lack of freedom. The lack of freedom to see that actually right is only right because I make it so, and wrong is only wrong because I make it so. So what we're really talking about is what J.G. Bennett calls negative freedom, the freedom not to be free. And it turns out the freedom that we really do love and the freedom that we really, really like is the freedom not to be free. That's what we mean when we say freedom. We think we mean freedom, but of course we don't. So to come back to the key question, why is controlling so very unhelpful in the psychological realm? It's unhelpful because what it means is perpetuating this viewpoint that we've chosen. So we have this positive rational view of the world, this black and white view. And controlling really means perpetuating this view, not questioning it, this way of looking at the world. So in other words, controlling isn't freedom. Controlling is being trapped within that way of looking at the world. So from a psychological point of view, we're working hard at perpetuating our lack of freedom, our trappedness. So straight away, as soon as we say that, we can see very clearly why controlling might not be the be-all and the end-all as you say it is. Another way of putting it is to say that when we control, we perpetuate this idea that we have of ourselves. And it is only through controlling that we can perpetuate this idea that we have of ourselves. Because this idea that we have of ourselves, which is a bit of a cumbersome phrase, but nonetheless, perpetuates itself, or creates itself, if you want to say that, by projecting positive and negative outcomes that it has to strive either towards or away from. So that's the game of the I concept, the self-image. Its game is to project right and wrong, and then strive mightily to gravitate towards the former and away from the latter. Now, what it doesn't see and cannot see is that right and wrong are its own projections. So technically speaking, when we live in a world of our projections and we can't see that they are our projections, then technically we're unconscious. We're in dream world. Not unconscious in the sense that I've just sniffed anaesthetic and I'm out cold. Unconscious in the sense that I can't tell that my own projections are my own projections, and that secludes me or cocoons me from reality, quite simply because reality isn't my own projection. Reality is reality precisely because I didn't make it, which is a bit like a Philip K. Dick quote. So the fact that reality is completely independent of my rational perspective, the way I have of looking at things, my assumptions, is what makes it reality. When what I take to be reality only seems to be reality because it corresponds to my assumptions, to my rational outlook, then that's how come it isn't reality. But it functions as reality because it's the only reality we know, because we don't see anything that's independent of our own rational process. So that's why in all the mystical traditions and in Jung's approach, this is spoken a bit of as being unconscious. So when we put all our money on controlling, we never see reality. To see reality, we have to drop our controlling. This isn't to say that we should never ever control, but rather that we should not control and be invested in controlling 100% of the time, wall-to-wall controlling all the time, and we mustn't ever stop. We mustn't ever let go controlling, because that's a form of denial of reality. So as well as control, there must also be letting go of control, and then we can live healthily and in tune with what's actually going on. And that's the same as saying there's nothing wrong with thinking, but it is harmful to be thinking all the time. It's harmful because it insulates us from reality. And that's harmful because, even though I suppose it's not really necessary to say it's harmful to be separated from reality, But it's harmful because we then become totally alienated from everything that matters, everything that's wholesome. And we get involved in pointless games that we think are the thing, but they aren't the thing. So we spend all our time tying ourselves up in knots in pointless games, nurturing and feeding a false sense of ourselves. Now, you could say that's not harmful, that's okay. And in a way it is okay, because it's part of negative freedom, but it causes suffering. Because to be cut off from who we really are is suffering. There's no way of getting away from that. There's no way of getting around that. To be cut off from who we are is suffering. So it's the suffering of impoverishment. As Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, we are impoverished. We are the impoverishment. Our being is impoverishment, so it's not really being at all. And because of this impoverishment, we're always striving, because we're always trying to make good the deficit. But we do this within the realm of our projections, by striving for good, for striving for right, for striving what seems to be an attractive outcome. So we perpetuate the deficiency by our D-type motivation, our deficit-type motivation, as Abraham Maslow calls it. So round and round we go, round and round forever and ever and ever, always trapped in the web. And that's why unconsciousness is not really a happy way to be, because it involves a lot of suffering, and our very attempts to escape the suffering that it involves creates more suffering. So it doesn't take too much imagination to see that. That isn't a great setup, really. It's not that great. So when we are suffering, mental health-wise, because of the lack of reality, essentially, and that when there's a lack of reality, there's compulsion instead. Compulsion is the big stick that beats us, as well as being the carrot that pulls us. And when there's no reality, we're craving for reality, but we're craving false versions of reality that control us, because we don't know they're false versions of reality. So we're always striving towards imaginary carrots and running away from imaginary sticks. But when I say striving, there's no freedom in it, we are compelled. And that's life in the unconscious realm. So then when I am suffering, and someone comes along and say, yeah, you've got to control better, you've got to have new improved ways of controlling. Clearly, this is not a helpful thing to be told. Not only is it not a helpful thing to be told, it's a super unhelpful thing to be told. It's like being told the thing that is causing your affliction is what you actually need to be taking in order to get the affliction to go away. It's like rubbing chili pepper into an open wound. Or quite possibly there's a better simile than that, but I can't think of any. Drinking vinegar when you're dying of thirst. So that's a very clear way of looking at why controlling isn't the man for the job when we're in neurotic pain, because the controlling is the source of our pain in the first place. And the controlling is the source of our pain because what we're doing is we're extending and propagating this false idea of ourselves via our controlling. And it's the fact that we are trapped in this false idea of ourselves that we absolutely can't question. Never in a million years would we think of that as being the problem. That controlling is such a ludicrous thing to suggest as a solution. The solution isn't to find a solution on behalf of the false idea of ourselves, which is mental health for the I concept, mental health for the self-image, but to let go of that viewpoint, go back to the drawing board and have a new way of being in the world, a new way of looking at the world, which doesn't come about as a result of controlling, because we don't control ourselves into having a new way of looking at the world, despite what CBT may say. It's a self-evident fact that we don't get a new way of looking at the world by controlling, because controlling means extending our positive rational view of the world even further, rejigging it maybe so we can get the bits we like and not the bits we don't like, but it's the same old assumptions. It's all based on the same old assumptions. So CBT is no good for questioning our assumptions. And even talking about questioning our assumptions isn't quite right. It's not that we should sit there rationally interrogating them, but that we should look at them and realize they're not necessarily absolutely true and just let go of them. So it's letting go of our assumptions. And letting go is the opposite of controlling. We can't control to let go. Even though we'd dearly love to have a type of therapy that has steps and procedures to show us how to let go, which is what all of our kind of newfangled therapies, such as using compassion or radical acceptance as a therapeutic modality. Yeah, that stuff works. Let's throw that into our therapy as if we can use it as a means of controlling, or as if there's something we can do in order to radically accept our reality. And there is nothing we can do, because anything we do, doing equals controlling, equals perpetuating the way we're looking at the world, perpetuating the false viewpoint, the viewpoint of who I think I am, but I'm not. So doing isn't the answer. And if doing isn't the answer, we can't really talk in terms of procedures. And here's a kind of a theory of how it works, and here's how doing this can help you, and doing this can't help you. Because it's what we don't do that helps us. And at the risk of stating the obvious, which I have been doing over and over again, you can't really have a theory for how to not do stuff. You can't have a therapy for how to not do stuff. You can't have guidelines, and you can't have a map or a model, or you can't have a book about it, because there's nothing to say about it, because everything we say is doing. Okay, thanks for watching.